Welcome everyone in my paper and my presentation about my paper Twist and Shout. I'm Rosa Groen. I'm working at the Hague University of Applied Sciences and Leiden University, where I am a external PhD candidate and finishing up my PhD at the moment. The research question of my whole PhD is what determines the successes and failures of small to medium-sized Western European cities in attracting international organizations. And as you see with the little pictures over here, I am comparing Geneva, The Hague, Vienna, and Copenhagen. And what I will do in this presentation is justify the study and paper and the research question. And then I will present to you the three conceptual lenses that I worked with and highlight one of the theoretical conceptual lenses and the theoretical background methods and results. I will finish with some conclusions and a question how you can help me to improve this paper. So a justification of this study and my paper. Well, Western European cities, medium-sized cities as The Hague, are coping with competition from other non-Western cities and among each other in attracting international organizations. And how cities in cooperation with their host state attract international organizations has not been studied in depth before. To keep their competitive advantage, they need to be successful in attracting and retaining international organizations and change their strategies. And this is what some of these cities do in order to be successful. And I wanted to find out how this works. I did this with looking at the subject from three different lenses. That is the instrumental lens, where I looked at policy design and policy perception. The institutional lens, where I looked at similar frames and between different groups, so the project group attracting and international organizations and the policy network, so within government groups, and between the project group attracting the organization and the international organizations representatives already in the city. The third lens is the interactive lens, where I looked at network characteristics or social network analysis. The dependent variable is success, and it's actually not that easy to define success. So I used two sub-variables, the success as fact, so how far did a host city make it into the bidding process, and success as interpretation, when the project group and policy network perceives the case as a success. So when looking at the process of attracting international organizations with a metaphor as a game of chess, then you could say that instrumentally we are only looking at the board and the chess pieces. Institutionally, we are looking at the norms and the rules of the players in the game. And interactively, we're actually looking at how players play the game. And when is it a success? Most successful is when the successfully attracted organization is also perceived as a success. Well, the theoretical background of the institutional lens highlighted in this paper is based on sociological and normative institutionalism. I think you all know March-and-Olson's theory. And choices will remain within parameters established by the dominant institutional values and norms. So the membership of an institution, I'm quoting Peters now, is argued to create the same sort of perceptual frame. So what I wanted to know and to see is if it really works that way. So if the project group attracting the international organization and the policy network that is dealing with international organizations, if when they are in the same institutional background, if they apply the same rules and norms, and when they do, if they are more successful or less successful in attracting international organizations. And the second hypothesis is the more the priorities and narratives, so the frame, overlaps between the project group and the international organization representatives in the host city, the higher likelihood of success in attracting international organizations. For this paper, I have two aims: to explore the priorities and narratives of different groups about what is important to international organizations, and to identify if the argument holds that the higher the overlap within government groups and between project group and IOs, the higher the likelihood of successfully attracting the IO. In order to do this, I selected 8 cases. So in each city, a failed case to attract and a successful case. This was in Geneva, the Green Climate Fund, the Arms Trade Treaty, and in The Hague, the International Criminal Court and UNICEF Private Fundraising Partnership. In Vienna, the Arms Trade Treaty Secretariat, the Sustainable Energy for All, which was a quasi-international organization. In Copenhagen, the United Nations Office for Project Services and Sustainable Energy for All, which remained seated in Vienna. So there are 2 cases overlapping. The Arms Trade Treaty Secretariat was successfully attracted by Geneva, but not by Vienna. And the Sustainable Energy for All was retained successfully by Vienna and not attracted successfully by Copenhagen. So in total 6 cases, but 8 cases if you look at it from the perspective of these specific host cities. So with these cases, 4 cities, which I selected with most similar systems design, so medium-sized, similar cities, all Western European, same type of competition and same type of attracted organizations, and DSD, which is most different systems design, because I selected 4 successfully attracted and 4 failed to attract organizations. So you could argue that those are different from each other and could be compared in the end. I used semi-structured interviews and qualitative data analysis, which I did with the constant comparative method as part of the interpretative public administration, and I used a game with cards, which is a little bit quantitative, but not so much leaning on it. My interviewees consisted of a group of 150 interviewees, a little bit more because sometimes I spoke to an interviewee or respondent twice or 3 times, and sometimes they were in both project groups attracting both organizations in one city, or sometimes they were in the policy network and also in the project group. So there were some overlaps, but I used those observations or interviews as separate interviews, which makes it 198 observations in total. So a lot of data, a lot of qualitative data. The different groups that I compared for the institutional lens were project group of the successful case, the project group attracting the failed case, the policy network in the host city, retaining the international organizations, and the international organizations already seated in the host city. So continuing with the methods, quantitatively very limited. I looked at statements, so 22 cards with locational factors like international schools are well organized, or the physical infrastructure works well, or livability is high in this city. These 22 locational factors or elements, I asked the respondents to prioritize and make different groups. So 5 most important, 5 least important, and then 3 most important and 3 least important. And they motivated their answers. And this was the most important part for the qualitative method. I looked at different groups, so a comparison of interviews from different groups. I used the 3rd step of the constant comparative method of Booye, and the narratives are coded and qualitatively analyzed. So the results for the first hypothesis, so the overlap in narratives and priorities between project groups and policy networks. I have one example here for the failed case of Geneva, where you can see that the relevant centers was most important to both groups. Political situation is stable was most important for the project group, and also very important for the policy network, and then it starts to differ. So the project group found Texas more important, so that's the host state agreement with the organization, and the other group of policy network members found physical infrastructure more important. But these overlaps are quite significant. When we are looking at another example between, for the second hypothesis, between the project group and the IO representatives, I have an example here of the successfully attracted case of Copenhagen, which was actually a bit of an outlier, because it was successfully attracted and they don't really overlap. You can see here that Texas is most important to the project group, attracting UNOPS, but the physical infrastructure and settling in is well organized was most important to the international organization's representatives. So this is actually the mean of the top 5 that they gave. So the highest was 3.5 in this case, and the lowest 0. So the results of the first hypothesis is actually not really overwhelming. So you can see in the left top of this table the failure out in the first stage of the project, of the process, and the perceived failure, and that was the Arms Trade Treaty, with one of the highest scores of overlap between the project group and the policy network, and the lowest is actually one of the most successfully attracted cases, which was both successfully attracted and perceived as a success, which was the outlier that I discussed just now, UNOPS. Then the results of the second hypothesis is actually more what I thought it would be. So this is more result I expected, because you can see here in the right bottom of the table that the most successfully attracted organizations all have high scores of overlapping priorities between the project group and the international organization representatives. The overlap in narratives was actually in most cases the same as the overlap in priorities. They had these explanations about the priorities were very much in line with the priorities themselves. There were, however, in hypothesis 1 big differences between the cities. In Geneva, similarities overlap between government groups is average in both cases. In The Hague, there was a higher overlap between project group and the policy network of the successful case, but then in Vienna and Copenhagen, there was a higher overlap in failed case. The second hypothesis, so is there a higher overlap in priorities and narratives between the project group and the international organizations themselves, was actually confirmed. So the higher the overlap, the higher the likelihood of success, which also points in the direction of the results in the policy framing literature, the lobbying literature, which states that between different groups the overlap is likely to be more effective than between similar groups. So this study confirms that convergence of frames between different groups has a higher effect on success than between similar intergovernmental groups, which does not mean that these 8 cases are generalizable, but for these 8 cases, this is what I found. And this is interesting as a contribution in itself to the normative and framing literature of Schimmelpfennig and Thomas, but also Baumgartner and Mahoney and Borang and Naurin. But it's also contributing to the small to medium-sized city literature, where the locational elements for international organizations has not been studied this way before. So due to this study, we now know that relevant centers are nearby and cooperative is very much a priority for international organizations. Political stability, physical infrastructure, and taxes are beneficial as well. So these things I found are very interesting. What I would like to know from you is how can I improve the constant comparative methods section in this paper, and what does the reader want to know about the codes that I applied and how I applied those and compared my narratives, and how can this paper become more embedded in the interpretative public administration literature. Thank you so much. A city needs to twist and shout in order to attract international organizations. And here are my references. Thank you. Bye-bye.